Hello and welcome back. If you're new here, this channel is dedicated to helping healthcare operations professionals actually use Lean Six Sigma, not just collect a certification and put it on a shelf. Before we get into it, I want to flag something important. This video is part of the free training series available inside the Lean Six Sigma Accelerator community on School. If you're not already a member, the link is in the description below. It's completely free to join. Inside, you'll find the SIPOC template we're using today, other tools from the toolkit, live sessions, and a community of healthcare ops professionals who are working through this exact same stuff on real projects in real hospitals and health systems. Go grab the link after you watch. The template is in there waiting for you. Now, today we are talking about the SIPOC diagram, and I want to be honest with you up front. The SIPOC is one of those tools that most people think is too simple to take seriously. You see the 5 columns, you think, okay, I get it. And then you rush through it in 20 minutes or skip it entirely. That is a mistake. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why. And you'll know how to complete one the right way in a healthcare context as a white belt practitioner, starting or supporting a process improvement project. Let's get into it. SIPOC stands for Suppliers, Inputs, Process, Outputs, and Customers. It is a high-level process map. And that word high level is doing a lot of work in that definition. A SIPOC is not a detailed flowchart. It's not a swim lane diagram. It's not a step-by-step work instruction. The SIPOC is the 30,000-foot view. It captures the entire scope of a process on a single page before you ever dive into detailed analysis. In Lean Six Sigma, the SIPOC is completed during the define phase, typically right after the project charter, and its purpose is specific. It's not to document everything. It's to build shared understanding of where the process starts, where it ends, and who is affected by it. Think of it this way. If someone walked up to you and said, "Tell me what this process is about," the SIPOC is your one-page answer. Now here is the reason people underestimate it. A SIPOC looks simple, but what it does is powerful. Done well, a SIPOC will expose scope disagreements early, before they derail your project 3 months in when everyone thought they were working on different things. Identify the true customer of the process, which, in healthcare, is often not who your team assumes. Clarify what counts as a meaningful input versus noise, which matters a lot when you get to data collection in the measure phase. Surface upstream suppliers whose behavior is actually causing the downstream problem you're trying to fix. Create alignment between your project team and your sponsor about what is in scope and what isn't. The SIPOC is also a communication tool. If you have a new stakeholder, a new department head, someone who just joined the steering committee, showing them your SIPOC is the fastest way to orient them without a 45-minute meeting. It earns its place in every project. Let's look at what actually goes in it. Okay, let's walk through each column. I'm going to use a common healthcare example throughout, a patient referral and intake process, so you can see how this translates from theory to your world. Column S. Suppliers. The S column answers the question, who or what provides the inputs to this process? Suppliers can be internal departments, external vendors, systems, or other teams. In healthcare, we're not just talking about vendors. We're often talking about other units, other care team members, or technology systems that feed information into the start of a process. For a patient referral and intake process, your suppliers might include the EHR or EMR system. It's providing patient data. The referring physician's office, they're sending the order, the insurance or payer providing authorization status. The lab or radiology department, if prior results are needed before intake begins. The scheduling team, if they're upstream of your process. One thing the suppliers column often reveals, there are more inputs coming from more places than your team originally thought. That's not a problem. That's the SIPOC doing its job. Column I. Inputs. The I column answers. What materials, information, data, or resources enter the process? Focus here on what is actually needed for the process to begin or run correctly. These are the things that, if they were missing or wrong, the process would break down or produce a defect. For our referral and intake example, patient referral order, the trigger that starts the process insurance authorization, needed before scheduling can happen. Physician order set. What the ordering provider is requesting patient medical history, needed for intake assessment. Demographic and insurance information, for registration and billing. Here is a common mistake. People list everything that touches the process as an input. Resist that. Focus on what must be present and correct for the process to deliver the right output. That specificity will serve you in the measure phase when you're designing your data collection plan. Column P. Process. The P column is where most practitioners go first, and for good reason. It's the anchor. The process column lists 4 to 7 high-level steps in the process, in sequence, using verb-noun format. This is not a flowchart. You are not capturing decision branches, exceptions, system interactions, or sub-steps. You are capturing the activity-level sequence that a knowledgeable person would name if you asked them, "What does this process do?" For our referral and intake example, receive patient referral or request. Verify insurance and eligibility. Schedule appointment or admission. Conduct intake assessment. Order diagnostics, labs, or imaging. Document findings and update the record. Communicate results and next steps to the care team. Notice the format: verb, then noun. Receive referral. Verify insurance. Conduct assessment. That active verb-noun structure keeps the steps crisp and prevents ambiguity. And critically, before you list a single step, you need to define 2 things. Where does this process start, and where does it end? If your team can't agree on the start and stop points, the SIPOC will be a mess. Get that alignment first. Column O. Outputs. The O column answers. What does this process produce? Outputs are what the next step or the customer actually receives. They should be tangible and measurable wherever possible. A common and important distinction. Outputs are not the same as outcomes. An output is what the process produces. An outcome is the result for the customer after they receive it. That distinction matters for how you'll eventually measure success. For our intake example, outputs might include a completed patient intake assessment, an updated care plan, a lab or imaging order that's been placed, a discharge summary, a medication reconciliation record. Each of these is a thing that can be handed off, documented, reviewed. That's what makes it an output. Yes, sir. Column C. Customers. The final column. Who receives the output of this process? In healthcare, this is where teams often realize they've been thinking too narrowly. The customer is not just the patient. In a process improvement context, customers include everyone who receives and depends on what your process produces. For the referral and intake process, the patient and their family receiving the care itself. The attending physician receiving the assessment and care plan, the receiving unit or next care team receiving the handoff. The insurance payer receiving documentation for billing the regulatory body, receiving records for compliance. This column often opens the conversation about internal customers, the next department, the next shift, the next provider, whose work quality depends entirely on what comes out of your process. That's a powerful reframe for a team that's been thinking the customer is just the patient. Here is the single most important tactical tip in this entire video, and it is counterintuitive. Do not start with suppliers. Start with process. I know, the acronym is SIPOC, but the recommended order of completion is process to outputs to customers to inputs to suppliers. Here's why this matters. If you start with suppliers, your team will anchor on all the things that feed into the process before they've agreed on what the process actually is. You'll end up listing inputs for a process that hasn't been scoped yet, and you'll go in circles. Starting with the process column forces shared alignment first. What are we actually talking about? What are the steps? Where does it start? Where does it stop? Once you've nailed the process steps, outputs follow naturally, because now you know what the process is supposed to produce. Customers follow from outputs, because now you know who needs what. Inputs become clearer once you know what the process needs to run, and suppliers are easiest to identify once you know what the inputs are. Process to outputs, to customers to inputs to suppliers. Do it in that order. It will make every column faster and more accurate. And before you start filling any column, define your start and stop points. Write them at the top of the template. That one step will prevent more scope creep than almost anything else you do in the define phase. Let's run through the most common mistakes I see teams make when they're filling out a SIPOC, and the fixes. Mistake 1, listing more than 7 process steps. The SIPOC is not a flowchart. If you have 12 steps, you've gone too granular. Step back, group related activities, and stay at the activity level. Save the detail for your process map in the measure phase. Mistake 2. Confusing outputs with outcomes. The output is what the process produces. The outcome is what happens as a result. A completed discharge summary is an output. A patient who was discharged within the target time window is an outcome. Know the difference. It will matter when you set your project goals. Mistake 3. Only listing external customers. Internal handoffs matter just as much as the patient experience. The charge nurse receiving your documentation, the billing team receiving the intake record, the next shift receiving a status update, these are customers. Include them. Mistake 4. Skipping the suppliers column. This is where the real upstream causes often live. If you're seeing defects downstream, wrong information, missing data, delayed authorizations, the suppliers column will usually point you at who or what is introducing that variability. Don't skip it. Mistake 5. Treating the SIPOC as a checkbox. Fill it out. Then talk about it. The SIPOC should generate discussion. Where does the team disagree? Where is the scope unclear? Those conversations are the point. The completed diagram is not the deliverable. The shared understanding is. So once you've completed your SIPOC, what do you do with it? This is where the tool pays off. It scopes your data collection plan. The inputs column tells you what data you need to track. If insurance authorization is an input, then authorization turnaround time is a metric worth measuring in the measure phase. It defines your customer requirements. The customers column tells you whose requirements matter, and that shapes your CTQ, your critical to quality measures. What does each customer need from the process output? It points to upstream causes. If your team is struggling with defects or delays, look at your suppliers. Which supplier is providing late, incomplete, or inaccurate inputs? That's often where the root cause lives, and you'll explore it further with tools like the fishbone diagram. It keeps the project in scope. When scope creep happens, and it will, you come back to the SIPOC. Is this in or out of scope? The SIPOC gives you a documented, team-agreed boundary to reference. It's your orientation tool for stakeholders. Anytime a new sponsor, executive, or team member needs to understand your project, lead with the SIPOC. It's the fastest possible orientation. Think of the SIPOC as the foundation that every other define and measure phase tool is built on. When you skip it, you feel that instability later. When you do it well, the rest of the project has a center of gravity. Now, as a white belt practitioner, you may or may not be leading a full DMAIC project. You might be supporting a green belt project. You might be participating on a team, or you might be the person in your unit who's starting to build the vocabulary and the credibility to propose one. Regardless of where you are, here's how the SIPOC is useful to you right now. If you're supporting a project, your role in the SIPOC exercise is often to bring the frontline perspective. You know where the handoffs break down. You know what's missing when the process starts. Your input in building the suppliers and inputs columns is invaluable. Don't underestimate it. If you're building toward proposing a project, start by completing a SIPOC on your own for the process you want to improve. It doesn't have to be perfect. It forces you to define the scope, identify the customers, and name the inputs. And suddenly you have a document that looks like a practitioner who knows what they are talking about. And if you're just getting started with LSS, the SIPOC is the perfect first tool because it doesn't require data, software, or analysis. It requires observation, conversation, and structured thinking. You can do it with sticky notes in a conference room or in the downloadable template in the school community. Start there.